Good evening, directors, to tonight's work session. Tonight, we're going to have the opportunity to continue our discussion from a recent board meeting about projected staffing in schools and our budget outlook for the coming school year. We know that there have been many questions and initial feedback regarding, for instance, our preliminary staffing allocations. Tonight's just another in a series of opportunities to more accurately convey our revenues and expenditures, which continues to iterate and fluctuate throughout the springtime. So in some cases, there are some assumptions being made. So even though early in our budget development cycle, tonight we want to provide another layer of information, as well as provide some indication of key investment areas that we forecast. Staff and I plan tonight to share with you in more detail and a preview of proposed plans for both ongoing and one-time monies as part of our agreed-upon annual budget process and timeline, which has my budget proposal coming to the board next month. We hope that folks are tuning in this evening to hear more concrete information about our projected financial picture, especially as we continue to receive updated numbers from the state of Oregon. We're receiving clear information about our total revenues and now are awaiting financial implications of new legislation that will bring, for instance, additional benefits to Oregon school districts. Tonight, we're going to focus on three overall main points. First, you'll hear from our Chief Financial Officer, Alberto Delgadillo. He will share that while revenue of the general fund is increasing slightly, it's not keeping pace with the cost to operate our schools. We're expecting the gap between revenue and cost to widen to $51 million, or $18 million more in cost than revenue received. Next, you will hear from Dr. Renard Adams, our Chief of Research, Assessment, and Accountability. He will highlight that we are projected to reduce school-based staffing positions by 4%, or just over 100 positions from the close to 3,000 teachers who work here at UPS. He'll also share, this has been an area of much interest because it's always our preliminary staffing, that class size averages, what we're projecting for this coming school year. And I'll get to a little bit of the punchline. The bottom line is that we're projected to have average class sizes across every first, second, and third grade classroom at about 22 students. In fourth grade, 23. In fifth grade, 24. And in middle school, 28 students. And these averages are even lower across our CSI schools. As you know, we implemented equitable staffing formula, where in most cases, we expect to see class sizes of fewer than 18 students across kindergarten, first, and second grade classrooms. Our more equitable staffing ratios are ensuring lower class sizes at our most underserved schools, while making another incremental improvement towards class size goals more generally across the entire school district portfolio. And then lastly, you're going to hear from Dr. Cheryl Proctor, Deputy Superintendent for Instruction in School Communities. Although we're still developing next year's budget proposal, Dr. Proctor will walk you through a high-level preview of how it is we plan on utilizing one-time dollars in order to accelerate student achievement, especially for our Black, Indigenous, and students of color. In short, you're going to hear about our continued and steady increase in mental behavioral health supports for our students, sorely needed at this time. You'll also begin to hear that we plan to utilize these one-time dollars by targeting learning supports across VPS schools, especially focused on supporting students at CSI and Title I schools. This will include, for example, adding literacy and math acceleration educators to provide interventions and supports to address the academic needs of identified students. Those are additional educator positions. We also expect to grow our extended learning and enrichment programming with a specific focus on strengthening collaboration with our community's culturally specific organizations. Our RESJ and community-based partners have been a critical aspect of this work and will continue to play a significant impact on student academic achievement. This past summer, we had an incredibly robust menu of summer programming. The staff is already working to design another summer of both a balance of academic supports and enrichment opportunities for our students. As we transition into a more endemic phase of this pandemic, we expect to return to our identified priorities like more squarely launching into, resourcing, and making significant progress on our approach for the Center for Black Student Excellence. Our intent is also to address the inequitable academic outcomes of our most underserved student group at PPS, our Native students. We're motivated to co-develop a plan that goes far beyond Title VI Indian education compliance goals to ensure that we make a positive impact on Native American student achievement. As an educator, I value the critical importance of professional development and collaboration, and the impact that it has on student success and lesson preparation. If directors haven't had a chance to read the Council of Great City Schools recommendations for the use of federal one-time monies, I certainly recommend it. I'll resend a link to it. The suggestion the council makes is to focus one-time dollars investing and developing our educators and school leaders, making training, planning, and collaboration opportunities widely available, especially as we introduce new curriculum adoptions and we focused our attention on meeting the needs of our diverse learners. There's also lessons learned from prior recessions, where there was one-time federal monies, and the lessons learned from that time period. These are many of the ingredients that we've already called for in our strategic plan, Forward Together, that provides a blueprint, a transparent view into our focus areas. With the pandemic starting to be in our rearview mirror, we are intent on making significant progress on our strategic plan, including a deliberate focus on cultivating a strong culture of racial equity and care, and developing a diverse, high-quality, and thriving workforce. I want to be clear. The preview of investments are the proposed activities and supports we want to focus on in the coming school year. These activities and supports are aimed at both raising the overall organizational capacity and targeting supports for underserved students, Black and Native students in particular. These action steps are precisely in response to making progress on and addressing the board goals identified by directors. There are always other choices and thus trade-offs that we can make, but we believe we're developing an evidence-based proposal that will provide for a responsible and balanced district budget that keeps us fiscally solvent, preserves an adequate fund balance, leverages one-time funds to invest in our students and people, while making overarching and sustainable progress that will make us a stronger school system. I'm joined here this evening by the entire superintendent's leadership team. They will each be available for questions as they come up and discussion at the end of our presentation. If you have clarifying questions as the staff is going through their presentation, please ask. Otherwise, we can have a full discussion after a dozen slides. And of course, we are tracking every board member's questions and archiving those on a list so that everyone can see those. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to staff, starting with our CFO, Norberto Zerganillo.
Thank you, Superintendent Guerrero. Good evening, directors and Student Representative Weinberg. Tonight, I would like to focus my presentation on the district's upcoming proposed budget on two main points. One, yes, PPS has more dollars from the state and from local revenue to support our schools than last year. However, revenue is not keeping pace with the cost to operate schools, and before we balance our budget, we expect to be short $18 million next year. I will explain why this evening. Secondly, yes, PPS has additional one-time dollars and other targeted investments aimed at direct academic and mental health supports for students. As a school system, thanks in large part to this school board's commitment, we are hyper-focused on addressing the pervasive opportunity gaps for Black, Native American, and students of color. We believe that with our limited resources, especially one-time dollars, we will directly support and increase opportunities for our students of color, especially our Black and Native American students. I will explain why in numbers, with then Dr. Adams and Dr. Proctor outlining what this will mean for students and our school-based staff. Next slide, please. I want to start off this slide by acknowledging once again that yes, PPS has more dollars from the state and from local revenue to support our schools compared to this current year. One of the reasons that many people have questioned about PPS revenues numbers is because, as we've been clear from the beginning, these numbers continue to be updated. Tonight, we're sharing the most up-to-date information. On your screen, you'll see that PPS is projected to receive $668 million in total revenue for general operations of schools. Next school year, we're projected to receive $704 million to operate our schools. And this is a $26 million increase year to year, 4% more than this year. PPS, like every other school system, is seeing an increase in dollars per student. With the positive state economic forecast, the 4% increase in state and local revenue is a reflection of these projections. More granularly, you will see that PPS is projected to receive $111 million from the local option levy, or about $7 million more than this year, helping to provide dollars to fund close to 900 teaching positions at PPS. We are projected to receive about $1 million less in revenue from the city art tax, which, as you've heard from us before, is a direct result of declining enrollment. The city ordinance distributes funds to school districts at a 500-to-1 ratio, with PPS further investing general fund resources to lower that ratio to 450. In summary, PPS is projected to see about $26 million more in our general operations budget. And to acknowledge, this projected increase does not include ESSER dollars, the student investment account, nor any additional federal title funds that support students directly. We will get to those numbers later on during the presentation. Next slide. So now for expenditures. While PPS is expected to receive $26 million more this year, we're also expecting costs to run our schools to increase by $44 million next year. So you might be asking yourself, why a $44 million increase? School district expenses can be divided into three primary buckets. First is people, or the salary and benefits we pay to each employee. For our general fund, this includes over 1,900 of our classroom teachers, 127 school counselors, 83 principals, media specialists, bus drivers, custodians, just to name a few. Each year, as part of our agreements with our labor partners, or as a response to the job market, PPS, like any organization, must make adjustments, such as cost of living. Each year, we also see the cost of benefits, like health insurance, continue to increase. For example, this next school year, we expect to see salary and benefits costs increase 4%, or about $26 million. One of the largest increases is transportation, or the cost of taking students to and from school, which this year has skyrocketed more than 45% year over year, or $13 million in additional costs. As we're all aware, the job market for bus drivers has had a steep wage increases and lack of available candidates. Costs of salaries, benefits, training, gas have all increased dramatically. I will note that we do receive, like many school districts in the state, a significant reimbursement to offset the cost of transportation, but it's also still important to note the steep increases in costs. The next area of expenses are utilities, services, materials, and supplies. This allocation ensures the lights are on in schools, provides essential learning materials to schools for learning such as workbooks and other consumable materials. Overall, we expect our costs to go up $44 million, or about 6%. So while PPS is seeing an increase in dollars per student, we're also seeing costs to educate our students continue to grow, outpacing the general fund revenue. Next slide. A few important...
Can I just ask a quick question about the...
I'm sorry, I got a quick question. Hello? Oh.
I was going to ask a question too, Gary.
Yeah,
go ahead, I'll follow.
All right, can we go back to the last slide? So on transportation, you said we have a 42 million projected cost, but we get a offset or reimbursement of that. How much of that is that? And why wouldn't we have that deducted on, have that presented on this slide?
So,
go ahead.
Sorry, Dr. Hollins.
Or is that the net?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so the state reimburses us at 70%. So out of that 42 million, It's actually closer to 41 because there's about $1 million in capital costs that we do not get reimbursed in. So that then is 70% of that 41%. So it's about it's going to be about $29 million that we'll be getting reimbursed. And that $29 million is reflected in our revenue. So that additional reimbursement is accounted for in the previous slide.
It's in the state school fund grant, is that right? Because I see an asterisk next to the
Correct.
243 million, and then down there it says the transportation piece. Okay.
So as part of our state school funding, that reimbursement is incorporated into our total state school grant. So if for specific details on the ODE website, there's district estimate worksheets that outline that information.
Thank you.
I actually had almost the same question. So I guess what you're saying is that for 21, 22, essentially it's about 10 million from PPS and the state pays the rest. And then the increase is about 12 to 12.
A little less. We're forecasting to go from about 20 million to like 29 million. You're spot on. We can.
So it's about a $2 million, like after net out increase
Yeah,
that we pay. Sorry, is what I'm asking.
So
Julia, I'm just looking at it says on the slide above the revenue general fund, there's an asterisk. And then if you look down below, it says transportation grant is forecasted to increase by approximately 7 million. So if our transportation costs are increasing by 13, will be offset by the 7, which would be 6 million. I mean, and these are all still early numbers,
Yeah,
right?
And round.
And round, yeah.
And I think that the comparison would be what we received this year. So what we're forecasted to receive this year, I don't have the number off the top of my head for the clear distinction in jump, but I can go back and quickly calculate that.
Yeah, so just, I want to make clear. So the 29 and 42, we actually, what our costs are is 30% of both of those numbers.
It's 30% of the closer to 41 million.
Okay, but
But I think
it's about 30%.
I think that's misleading, Julia, because we pay 100% of it, but we get revenue in the state schools fund to offset. So if we say we're only paying 30% of that, then we have to take the 70 out of the state school fund grant income.
Yes, right.
That's correct.
That is clear.
Yeah, actually, I'm sorry. You're correct. And on that slide, I would make the similar adjustment. So thank you. But I'm just trying to figure out like how much of the increase we're actually absorbing.
It looks like, well, just the math I said earlier, it's about 6 million, right? If the increase is 7 million from the state and the increased cost is 13 million, it would be approximately a $6 million increase.
I'm not.
I mean, that's just, yeah.
I want to make sure I can speak to it, but I think Director Brim-Edwards, to your point, there's the opportunity as we continue the conversation to further itemize that and help explain that correlation. What is helpful is that the numbers on the previous slide incorporate the revenue from as outlined in the worksheet, which includes a transportation grant, and all of those numbers are incorporated into our revenues.
Can I just say, I think the important takeaway from the board's perspective is that the $18 million gap includes our portion of the transportation.
Correct.
Because you're showing the revenue on one side and expenditures on the other, that's the important takeaway. It is included in.
Yes. Yep. Thank you.
You listed like quite a few like
The
reasons why it's
translator.
been increased so much. Is there like one specific reason like it's increased by so much? Sorry, like you gave quite a few reasons. Is there like one that's like the biggest driver?
In the transportation
Yes.
line. Our biggest component is people.
Okay.
So it just drives across, and it's being able to be competitive, be responsive to our families. We need to keep up with the labor market, and so that's one of the biggest, if not the.
I have a really granular.
intended.
Does that, do the costs for transportation include fuel,
Uh,
which is going up? It's gonna be going up.
It
It's already gone up.
does, yeah.
It's labor and fuel.
And
Labor,
capital.
fuel,
Yep, capital.
So directors, I've noted that there's a number of questions on transportation, so I've noted those down. And we'll have a follow-up. So again, please ask your questions in writing and we'll get back to you.
I think it's about, the question's about the map,
Map.
not the
Which is-
transportation.
Which is accurate.
Which is accurate, yes. It's very accurate.
Okay.
So Director, you want to continue?
I do. Okay, slide 5. Next slide, please. So a few important points of our school district's budget. 1, our general fund receives less money than it costs to run our schools. For example, this school year, PPS general fund is projected to receive about $678 million from our state and local revenue that incorporate the general fund. It costs us about $711 million to operate schools. 2, to address this gap, school districts like ours will utilize other resources to balance the budget. This sometimes includes tapping into our district's reserves, otherwise known as the fund balance. You can think about it as a rainy day fund for emergencies. Our reserves going into next year are projected to be about $88 million, or about 13% of the expected general fund revenue. Keeping in mind that we have a board policy that outlines the expectation that the district will achieve and sustain the 10% reserve. So for example, this school year, our gap to balance the budget, when we look at incoming revenue and outgoing expenditures, was about $33 million. Next school year, the gap between revenue and costs will widen to $51 million, or $18 million more in costs than revenue received. Bottom line, general fund revenue is not keeping pace with the cost to operate our schools. Before I turn it over to Dr. Adams for the next part of the presentation, I want to share a few thoughts with you. I take my responsibility for good and responsible fiscal management seriously. As we shared a few weeks ago, in 2 years, or in about the fiscal year 2024-2025, we're projected to be in a structural deficit, which means that our costs will hit an imbalance that we cannot sustain. We're very thankful to our state legislators, many who may be watching tonight, for the tremendous progress towards achieving the quality education model. And thus, accelerating that progress will address and give school districts more sustainable, ongoing money to operate schools fully. As a steward of the district's finances, I recognize the importance of making targeted and balanced decisions that keep direct supports to students and that manages the limited resources provided to us by the state and other local revenues. I know many people are wondering how PPS plans to use the close to $70 million remaining from the federal COVID relief funds and the additional funding from the student investment accounts. We will share a preview of that tonight, expecting to share a full budget proposal to the school board in April. However, I do think it's important to be clear with our community. Yes, PPS has significant dollars from the federal government. And also to be clear, these dollars, known as ESSER, are one-time dollars, meaning that when we expense them, they will no longer exist. I believe we need to be careful on how we spend our dollars, and so we should avoid spending one-time money on ongoing and recurring costs. We're at a pivotal moment at PPS. How do we best use one-time dollars to target and support the learning experiences of our Black and Native American students? With that in mind, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Adams.
Actually, can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
On the last slide.
I have,
Just from a number standpoint, so, and I see where the different numbers come from, and I think it's very clear, but do we have a $51 million gap? And that's what we're showing between cost and revenue. But then you also sort of mentioned this $18 million number, which is the increased size when you look at how much our revenues increased versus our expenditures this year. I noticed in 21-22, the current school year it's the $33 million gap. Was that gap closed with some of those one-time dollars in the current year? I mean, essentially, let me rephrase the question. Did we have a structural deficit this year? that we patched, and now it's getting even larger going into 22.
Yes. And we, when we approved the budget, we approved it with the intention of leveraging our fund balance to close that gap. In addition, we've also had tremendous underspend that has helped mitigate that gap. So it's been relying on our fund balance, but then also the unfortunate circumstances of COVID that just slowed down a lot of our present investments with whether it's professional development, whether it's field trips or whatever the case may be. That's just created that additional cushion for the time being.
But that's not replicable. That's pandemic related.
Correct.
And I don't know that we want it to be if we're not delivering the level of education we
Right.
would like for our students.
So thank you, and that's just going to preview some comments I'm going to make later, sort of around the whole, we're getting a lot of comments about people saying, why aren't you spending your one-time money to patch these holes? I think it's important to note, we are this year, and actually I think the proposed budget coming out plans to do that in 22-23. So the question is not, will we spend some of it? The question is, will we spend all of it? And where is that balance? You said this in a meeting a few weeks back. What's the right balance in terms of spending the one-time dollars in a way that is fiscally responsible, that patches, gets us, as one of my old bosses used to say, if you're going down a trough, it levels it out, right? Rather than building a ramp over a cliff, but sort of levels it out as you come to the bottom.
Yeah, do you want to jump off a 10,000-foot cliff or just kind of step off the curb?
Thank you.
I had a
Can I
question,
ask
but I
a-
know Gary had a question too.
Yes.
Go ahead, Director Green.
I'm just curious. They're going to be questions. In our desire, and I'm writing them down, just giving you what I wrote. In our desire to be careful, are we causing other school partners to go into a downward spiral? So in our desire to be careful and want to make sure that we keep this, this buffer, this cushion, so that we don't go below our cushion. So in our desire to maintain that, are we inadvertently causing other school partners to go into a downward spiral that maybe they may or may not be able to recover from? Is one. And my second question is it safe to say that we as a school district are benefiting financially from the low enrollment that some of our other school partners are having right now? Let me rephrase it. We got guaranteed money based on our enrollment levels as they were looking at the enrollment levels. So as a school district, we got guaranteed funds. This is a pet peeve of mine because I'm on the charter and alternative schools. So we got guaranteed funds based on the amount of students that they had coming into the building. And then when they weren't able to meet those numbers, even though the state paid us these guaranteed dollars, you got based on their high enrollment or their previous enrollment, we got X amount of dollars. And then when they didn't meet those numbers, because they're now on a month-to-month cycle, trying to figure out, they're chasing students on a daily basis, trying to figure out where they're at. Now, because their numbers are down, they're hurting, but we in turn benefited because we didn't lose anything from this day-to-day, month-to-month low enrollment that they're experiencing. We still got, if they gave us $10 million, I only know round numbers. If they gave us $10 million for all the charter school kids based on their previous year's enrollment, that they're going to have this many students coming in. So we anticipate paying out $10 million to the charter schools based on their previous enrollment. And then COVID hit us. And now all of a sudden, instead of them having 100 kids, they've got 50. And so although we got paid for 100, we only have to pay them for 50. So did we benefit as a school district because of their inability to meet their enrollment numbers?
In our district estimates, there is, in the worksheets that the state puts together, they put down the expectations of how much goes out to charter schools. And I forget her last name on Tara and Onia and team calculate how much funding will be going to the charter schools based on the information we have at hand. And so I'm trying to think about just thinking about like a net effect. The state generated a worksheet for us that has the ADMW enrollment number that includes the charters. And from that total of revenue, so when we go back, if we can just take a quick second, we go back to the slide that shows revenues. Right, so yeah, out of the state school fund, out of that $537 million, right now we're forecasting about $16 million of that will go to charter schools. That's the current calculation based on the information we have and the team's putting together. So I'm just like in thinking, I don't know if we're benefiting from it versus leveraging the numbers that we have to just ensure that the appropriate payments go out. Yeah.
We'll follow up with you. I think it's an interesting question. You can see Margaret and I are discussing here. Her staff will review your stuff.
Oh, yes. Sorry, didn't see you.
Staff will receive this work. So we can follow up with you to make sure that we have a clear.
Right, because I want to make sure that I'm asking the question right, because I know what I have. I know what I'm thinking up here.
Can I tell you what I heard, which is, I think charters and alternative programs, so when we receive 100 kids and they get 50 and they change to 20, 25 and go back to Lincoln or Marshall, who keeps the money?
No, that's not what I'm asking.
What is the delta between the
But I see
money
what you're
per
saying.
student that's allocated specifically for our partners? What's the delta? What happens with that change in dollar figure?
I think this is a really interesting question around too, like, so let's say the state funded us for 50,000 students and only 30,000 showed up. Do we have to return some of that money at the end of the school year, or do we get to keep all of that if we have a significantly
That's the
different
question.
ADMW? And if we're seeing our charter schools and our contract with our charter say we pay you for student, and they're seeing significant account lines and enrollment, I think it's a question around how do we sustain and partner with those organizations? Because we know, like, if they've suddenly lost half their students because of the pandemic, we want that school to stay around because we know the good work they do, but we also have to, like, be
Because as a
responsible
school
with our
district,
money.
we got paid, as a school district, we got paid for 50,000 students or 100,000 students. As a school district, that's what we got paid for. And we've got 2 years to flush this out, to figure this whole situation, to get it where it needs to go. So we're not losing anything right now because we've already been paid for 50,000 students, period. That money is ours. It sits with us. We do it with what we need to do with it. Now, for us, we have that money there. So that's why I asked the question, did we as a school district benefit? Because although we got paid for 50,000 and we would have paid them for those kids had they been able to show that those kids came. So we had money in the coffers ready to pay them for their 300 students that they have at a school, for their 200 students that they have at a school, for their 100 students that they have at a school. We were ready to pay them that because as a school district, we received that money in our coffers to say, we can pay you out for the same thing that you did last year. However, that money is sitting there, but they only can bill us now for 200 students instead of 300 like they would have before.
But
So
the
now
rent's
we
still the same.
get paid, they get paid for the 200. We sit on the money from that other 100 students. That's ours. That's money in the bank now. And
I think, yeah, so I think it's so I think the question is around cash flow, because ultimately we need the state will ask us to correct, and there'll be an adjustment. It's known as a May surprise.
So we
right,
have to pay back.
So we
the state.
eventually have to pay back.
we gotta true up.
You gotta true up.
Everybody's got to true up. At the end of the day, render unto Caesar what is Caesar.
True up. Butts and seats counts happen in September, and then there's eventually like a lag, and eventually we true up. So then maybe that's a follow-up, is like thinking about.
It's a timing question, right? Like, when do we have, like, as a district, when do we have to true up?
Correct.
And how often, and when do the charter and alternative?
The impact is less.
Right, so.
The impact is less. It's at a different time.
And they're doing it monthly, I think it's.
Right,
Yeah,
that's right, that's great.
That's right.
I just want to make sure we put that on tape because at some point, now I'm gonna shut up for a minute. and drank some soda, because as a preacher, I could talk all night. And I
So I have a
texted me.
We already know
I
it.
don't want y'all to text me talking about shut up, boy, quit playing over there.
I believe Director Brim Edwards has her hand up.
And so is Director Hollins. So I had a question just about these numbers because I'm looking at the presentation from the last board meeting, and it had in the pie chart, it has general fund revenue at 771 million, and then 2 weeks later, now it's 100 million less. So I'm curious about that. And then I'm also curious about the general fund, the description. Like it looks like that the slide that has the 51 million, that you're not including any of our revenue from the student investment account. And I think that would surprise some legislators. Just that the intent of when that was passed was it was, to be revenue to the district. And so I'm not sure why. I don't know if you can go to the other slide, why that's not included, or maybe it is, and the slide just doesn't reflect that.
This doesn't include any of the special revenue funds.
Correct, yeah, so real quickly.
Maybe you can start with the 100 million difference between last.
Yeah, it was actually, sure thing. That includes basically all of our fund balance. And essentially that slide included like all in, including our savings account.
Are we saying fund or fun?
We put the fund right?
I'm trying to understand.
We're trying to build
Funding,
your fund
funding.
balance.
He's looking for the pizza party. Where's that fund balance?
Yeah. So really like the conversation looking at the new money in, expenses out. And the distinction is how the state of Oregon categorizes the funding. So SIA is part of the special revenue fund.
Okay, but so there's no Student Success Act money in there, or it's just the student investment?
Haven't got there
account
yet.
money?
We will touch on some of those.
That's what they're saying.
Slide 12. Yeah.
We'll get there.
In general.
That's what they're saying. That's why I stopped talking too, because I was like, show me the money. But
So we're gonna actually transition to Dr. Adams, who's gonna walk us through our class size averages
Oh,
and staffing allocations.
that's a whole nother hot topic.
Dr. Adams.
And I'm sorry, because I'm not in the room, so it's hard for me. Did that question get answered? Is the SIA is not counted as revenue,
Not
even
part of
though
fund, it is a separate account. It's the student investment account, which we will talk on slide 12. So in a short bit, we will address how PPS is investing its $39 million to support direct students, to make direct support to students. Dr. Adams?
Thank you, Jonathan. Good evening, directors. I'm going to pick off where Chief Delgadillo left off. Under the steadfast leadership of this board and Superintendent Guerrero, PPS is focused on making racial equity and social justice a core element of who we are and therefore the decisions that we make. This includes how we staff our schools. Tonight, I would like to get across 3 main points related to school staffing. We hope these 3 points clear up any misconceptions that are still lingering out there. 1, as of this evening, we are projecting a total reduction of roughly 107 positions, or 4% of close to 3,000 student-facing positions. Again, we're expecting an overall reduction of a bit more than 100 positions out of almost 3,000, which is driven by the very simple fact that PPS is projecting to be educating over 3,000 fewer students next year as compared to our enrollment projection for this year. 2, nearly 98% of all classrooms based on our analyses are staffed well below the class size maximum thresholds, which we've continued to make progress in lowering next year. This means that across all of our elementary classrooms, 823 out of 843 classrooms are currently projected to be staffed well below the class size goal maximums. So no, we are not going to see a huge number of classrooms with class sizes of more than 30 students. And in fact, this gets to my 3rd point for the evening. The average class size across every first, second, and third grade classroom is projected to be 22 students. At schools that serve large number of Black students, Native American students, and students of color, namely our CSI schools, they on average will have a class size of 18 or less. So Director Green, last week you did ask what it would be like to see the staff our classrooms at below 25 students. As you'll see in the materials we've provided for you this evening, our students are experiencing on average class sizes that are less than 25 across kindergarten and fifth grade classrooms. If I could have the next slide, please.
You know, I'm curious about that, the average numbers, because when I look at the chart, there looks like at the 4th and 5th grade level, and then in the middle schools, we're in lots of schools in the 30s. And so like averages sometimes can be misleading. If it's great if you're in like an average that is the low one, but it does look like we've got a fair number of classes that are in the 30 range, and especially at the middle school level.
Yes, those are also averages. Those grades, those class size averages are also included in those materials. However, when we look across all of those grades, we can go back to the previous. We have a slide coming up that will have this information on it. If we look across, the numbers are actually a little bit lower. As an average works, some numbers are a little higher, some are a little lower, but none of the classes at this time are staffed above the class size maximum. If I could have the next one.
I have one question. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yes.
When we talk about reduction, I think it was on the last slide, but I think it's here too. When we talk about reduction of school-based staffing, are we talking about like those are people who will, those positions are cut, will not have, those positions will no longer be at PPS? Or are we talking about relocating some teachers within that reduction total?
Sure. So first, I'd like to clarify that the 107 number is not teachers. It is all school-based facing positions. And the 120 number that has been oft repeated has never been accurate because there was FTE included in there that were not teaching FTE. What we're talking about is people are being unassigned, and you're stealing a little bit of my thunder there, Director Hollins.
Okay.
People have been unassigned, which means they will have the opportunity to be at a different community school next year than they are right now. They are not being laid off.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Well, may I ask if we have a projected attrition? Is that included in that 107? In other words, there's always an expected number of retirements, for instance. No?
I would defer to.
See, look at top of that slide.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
So
Okay, thank you. I
right,
missed that.
every year we hire more PAT staff than the numbers that are represented on the slide in terms of positions that are being reduced. So, for example, we know that as of the beginning of this month, we had 79 teaching staff who have let us know that they're going to retire or resign by the end of the year, right? So we already know we have 79 that have announced their departures, and that will continue. We'll have people who take leaves of absence. We will have more people who retire, more people who resign.
So that, so 79, is there a date by which we know, like, all announcements of retirements are made, and then, I mean, it looks like we'll still be hiring 200, but are the 107 included in that, or?
We are still hiring.
Even after the 107, there's going to be a need for 200?
So I was talking about PAT positions specifically, right? So that's the 84,
Okay.
83.95.
Who's 0.95? Who's that person? Where are they at?
They
Yes.
don't work a whole day.
There are positions that are 0.2 positions, and
I'm just making sure that, there's not a half a person out there somewhere that really, we need to make them whole.
Dr. Adams, do you want to keep?
Except, I mean, I just sort of clarify a point from that Director Hollins asked. So let's say Kelly, and if I'm reading this right, it's 45% direct certification school, 88% historically underserved. It looks like they're getting a reduction of 3.75, and it looks like they may have gotten an add back, but essentially they're losing 3.75 positions. It's not like they're getting, like the teachers who are in those positions would be unassigned, and maybe if there's a retirement somewhere else, they may get picked up in another school. But the reality is Kelly will still have 3.75 fewer FTE.
Right, and as well as negative 21 less students, so almost a quarter less students as well.
Negative 21%.
21%.
Right, not
Less
students.
That's projection. That's projection, right? So because I just want to throw that out there because I believe in healthy projections and being safe, and I'm grateful that the smarter minds in the room are doing that. But I'm also I'm telling you, it's trying for me having this abundant mindset. I actually believe that as we move further into trying to get back to a new space, and our people are going to want to come back to school. They're going to want to put their kids back in school. When they start seeing all the wonderful work that we're doing within the classrooms, all the different things that we're offering, all those different, just things that are just good for holistic living. We were designed to be in community. People are going to want to come back to school. So as much as we're projecting right now that we're going to see a reduction, the reason that I'm trying to caution and just throw that out there, I tell Norberto all the time, he reminds me it's a pie, not a whale. I got that stuck into my brain, so I say it all the time. But I also want us to keep in mind, and I want us to also keep in mind that as much as we're saying it's this, what are we going to do when that flood of students come back next year because they're excited about what's happening? They're excited about all the summer school stuff that we've been putting into place, all the different programming that we've had that's really got them motivated to be back in school. I need us to make sure that we're going to be prepared to keep those students, as well. So I don't want, that's why I'm asking about the teaching.
We're ready for any student that walks into our doors to educate them to the fullest extent we can. So
and more, we're going to do
and more.
And more.
And more.
And if I could mention, there's been requests, well, why don't you anticipate the full return of students? That's what we've been doing for the past 2 years, and it hasn't happened.
Right.
Which is why we're looking at over 3,000 fewer students going into next year, right?
Yeah.
And given the financial outlook and the need to ensure that our staffing is right size, we still lower class size ratios, which I'll get to in a second, right? So we're still investing in class size, even as we're doing this sort of right sizing of the ship in terms of students and teachers. If I could stay on the slide, please. In the materials that you were given for this evening's discussion, you provided 2 documents, including a year-to-year staffing change with projected class sizes by grades at each school. It's important to note that these continue to be preliminary numbers and are subject to change. We're projected to reduce the number of school-based positions by 107. Of the 107 positions, as you can see on the slide, 61 are kindergarten homeroom teaching, K through 5, homeroom teaching positions, and 31 are middle school teaching positions. It's important to note that these positions and the individuals who hold them have been notified that they're being unassigned. This does not mean that they're being laid off. What it does mean is that these individuals will most likely be assigned to another school community next year. Again, at this time, no one has been laid off. If I could have the next
But
slide.
Dr. Adams, just to reiterate so that we're talking about both things at the same time, we still see an overall decline in our class sizes in those elementary grades on average.
On average, they're staying low. Yeah.
So
I
even
think
with
it's really
that
important to
reduction-
hold both those things at the same time. That, those people who are being unassigned, it means that there's some consolidation of classrooms at those schools based on lower enrollment, and yet on average, our class sizes will still be smaller, in some cases significantly smaller.
Sure, I was going to talk to that in a couple
Sorry.
slides. Yeah, I love it when you steal my thunder. Next slide, please.
That's why I'm not saying nothing else.
I'm gonna hold you to that.
I said a word. I said a word.
He has witnesses.
So I want to address the misinformation that our classrooms are being staffed at the maximum class size, which you can see actually in the documents that were presented and by some of the information on this slide. We expect that all but 20 classrooms are currently projected to be staffed well below the class size maximum. Again, that means that 823 out of 843 classrooms, that's 98% of classrooms, will have fewer students than the maximum threshold. I will point out that these continue to be preliminary numbers. That's one of the things we're challenged with, is you give someone a number and then it gets repeated for 3 weeks and the number has changed as we continue to make investments in schools. Our area senior directors and principals work alongside the central office staff, and they monitor class sizes at each school, such that when class sizes exceed our maximum, additional positions may be allocated to schools. Could I have the next slide?
I guess just the commentary at the last meeting, I think what Director Green raised is just given the pandemic is like an assessment of it's not, I don't think necessarily what you're hearing, at least what I'm hearing from the community is not so much that, hey, you're staffing them all at the maximum staff size, but that the actual maximum, given the pandemic and the learning gaps that exist, are too high.
Thank you for that.
Just given the differentiation between, where students have returned to our schools at. So it's not so much, I think, that people are saying your PPS is staffing at the maximum amount. It's more a question of, and what I thought I heard Director Green ask was I'll make you a doctor, but you also could be a director, was asking about actually lowering the staffing ratio at those middle grades where you're up into the 30s, just given the disparate learning experiences students had during the pandemic. That's what I heard. So I don't think people are out saying your PPS has got them all at the maximum class sizes.
Thank you for that. As you'll notice by this slide, our projected middle school class sizes are going to range between 23 and 29 students, and the average would be 28. But let me talk you through the slide a little bit. What do our class size maximums look like in practice? Well, we wanted to investigate that, and we did. And right now, we're projected to have average class sizes across every first, second, and third grade classroom of 22. This is not a significant increase from this year's current class sizes in K-5, which range from 19 to 22. In fourth grade, the projected class size is 23. At fifth grade, 24. And at middle school, 28. Now, this is what I think is really important. These averages are significantly lower across our CSI schools. At schools that serve large numbers of Black students, Native American students, and students of color, on average, those schools are projected to have class sizes of 18 or fewer across kindergarten, first, and second grade. I understand that our community is hearing a large number of class sizes will be as high as 35. This is not accurate based on our analyses. Before I talk, Dr. Proctor.
Quick question. And this is, I think, to Dr. Adams, and I understand these are averages, but when I look at TSI school like Sabin, and make sure I get this right here, I see average class size in kindergarten projected to be 29, 22, 28, 31, and 25 respectively from kindergarten to fifth grade.
Right, those higher class size averages are because that's not a Title I school and it's not a CSI school. That school is actually a TSI for Targeted School and Improvement.
Yeah, but that's what, so I guess I'm looking at it when I go in there and I know that school, you're talking about where you have a predominantly African, much a high one when these other schools wouldn't.
I didn't quite hear your question, Director Hollins, I'm sorry, or your comment.
So Sabin has been with a high population of African-American students. And if we're talking about having a focus on that, why would this school have that size when I'm looking at some of these Title I schools or CSI schools at 18, 20? But then when I look at Sabin, who has a high population of African-Americans in the school, we're at 29, 22, 28, 31, 25.
37%.
Right.
Here.
These are projected, as we mentioned, Director Hollins, these are projected numbers, and we are constantly monitoring them and providing additional FTE where that is warranted. And so we'll take this as something that we can examine with Dr. Proctor and Norberto over the next few days. Absolutely.
May I?
Yeah, and just
Thank you.
go ahead, Michelle.
A follow-on comment. So in the areas that are highlighted in yellow that have those 29s, are those higher numbers that are reported on the previous slide, are those bringing, I'm having a hard time understanding, I guess, why some of these class sizes are listed at 18, and maybe it's grade level, but the 29 is kind of bringing those averages up a little bit.
It could be, but there are 843 elementary classroom sections, right? So it would be hard for 1 or 2 or 5 schools to bring that average down by a whole lot. We have differential staffing for our CSI schools, our Title I schools, and all remaining schools. And so wherever you see yellow, that means on average, they're at that maximum. The schools here that are yellow are schools with higher socioeconomic status. And so we continue to see more staff being funneled to our schools with students who have lower SES and more students of color or more students who were historically underserved, which includes our English learners and our students with disabilities.
Okay, so in other words, if there's a classroom size, I'll use 29, that indicates to everybody reading it that the SES is higher. Are the achievement scores also higher in those areas? And so you're saying there's less of a need?
Typically, yes.
Okay.
Our equity staffing formula funnels more FTE to schools where there's more of a demonstrated student need.
More need, okay.
And if we do
that goes into the, when you're calculating, when you're putting your model together, you're looking at not just bodies and rooms, but you're looking at socioeconomic status, you're looking at achievement scores.
And most importantly, not just enrollment. Like, not that long ago, this district did staffing allocations based largely on enrollment, and that has essentially flipped in the last 4 or 5 years with an equitable staffing formula, so that enrollment is a component, and then there are all sorts of other considerations based on student need.
So I'm going to ask a question, just sort of a little bit of a follow-on to Director Hollins, but I'm can continue to focus on the middle grades here because, you know, just looking at this chart and the schools that I know, and first of all, doesn't appear there's any CSI schools. So I look at 2 neighborhood schools where I know there's great need, and I think some probably disproportionate impacts from the pandemic. I'm looking at George, the neighborhood side, and Ockley Green. And, you know, you've got at least, unless there's some significant offsets, the front page has, classes from 29 to 31, and then 28 to 33. And it appears that maybe the focus programs at some of the middle schools substantially lowers the average. And I think we have to be careful with average, but when I'm, like I say, just looking at Ockley and George, it seems like you've got classes there in schools with, really high needs, over 30.
And these are schools, again, that have a high population of African-American students.
Right, and what this chart cannot show at this time is what principals are doing with some of their discretionary FTE, like their FTE and foundation FTE and things like that typically use to lower class size, and I don't have a way of knowing that yet. Usually by the time you get a budget book, that information is identified in the budget book, and we're too early in the process to have that information at this moment because principals are still making decisions.
Where we can look at how the per student funding breaks down in that volume 2.
So
I don't think George or Ockley Green have a foundation that's going to be buying FTE. So I guess it's hard to say if like, hey, these are what they are, but they're not actually what they are.
But it takes into account all the other adults in the building in addition to classroom teachers. Like if you go to any of our CSI schools, you know, you have a number of different interventionists, climate coaches, a number of different FTE that are not just the classroom teachers. So when we look at class size, all that's telling us is the number of classroom teacher, and it's not telling anything about the rest of the adults.
yeah, I just want to appreciate the concerns, the questions that are being raised by directors. I know we're talking in averages, but I don't want to lose sort of the punchline here is we continue to equitably distribute staff to our schools in a differentiated way. We are, of course, tracking class teacher by teacher across every one of our schools. We rely on our principals and their supervisors to look at, is there space where that number's getting a little higher? What's happening with the all funds available to that school year? What are some of the other direct supports not accounted for here that are non-homeroom based that are also being made available? What other differentiated resources are being made available? We're going to continue to monitor just like we always have. I don't want to get lost in the point here that, you know, year over year, we've continued to sort of prioritize this. Class size, of course, there's an optimal size that we're always going for. That's why we agreed class size goals, and it is one lever, right? And there are the other levers, which we're going to talk about, that are also part of the equation and creating those more equitable opportunities, achievement outcomes. But we will, of course, remain vigilant and tracking where an individual class seems to be, you know, higher than what we would hope. So we'll continue to track those. That's the point of leaving a reserve. That's the point of having an objective panel look at what's the circumstance, what's the individual context in that school. Is it warranted? If it is, then we'll continue to distribute those additional FTEs.
Super.
I want to make just one quick comment about disturbing, and that's that at these schools that have a high need, there can be as much as like a 10 or 15% spread on the neighborhood versus the focus option. And I mean, it's glaring. There's, you know, at George is one, you know, neighborhood kids are 29. I know that's an average, and the focus option is 19.
That's the DLI program, right?
Can I just?
Yeah, but that's true throughout. I mean, I'm wondering what we do to, how do we explain that? And then, because we have disparate outcomes even within buildings, how do we adjust for that? What do we know now that we can help us make better decisions for the kids? They're obviously, whatever we're doing, we got all the numbers here, but it's not the outcomes they belie our interest in kind of equalizing.
My question about the DLI was just that, like, if it's a different kind of focus option that's maybe a science-based curriculum, it's easier to add kids in middle school than if it's a language and they haven't done all the prior work. So that's why I just was making sure I remembered that George was a language.
Not a science.
I just want to restate what the superintendent just said, because I just want to make sure that my board colleagues heard it. What this slide is showing is that the district has very significantly allocated resources towards the schools that we directed the superintendent 2.5 years ago to direct those resources to. So, and I think the averages are really useful and they're accurate, you know, in terms of looking at what we're doing district-wide. Certainly school by school, there are areas of concern. My experience is that the district, when you have these, you know, Markham, for instance, was a Title I school, it became not a Title I school, and then the district did come through with some additional resources that were not Title I resources, you know, to help sort of boost some of that staffing. But I guess I want to make sure we're being very careful. To the extent we start asking about very individual schools, we're sort of detracting from this overall allocation of resources, which is what we as a board have directed him to do. So if we want to start going in a different direction, I think we need to be explicit about that, because these resources are going to our CSI and Title I schools, which is what we've asked him to do.
Well, Director Scott, I agree with that. I think when you're talking about the things that we instructed the superintendent to do. And the schools that I'm talking about is literally around African-American students. That is literally what we should be talking about, because that is what the charge that we gave the superintendent. And I understand as far as looking at, we're going to continue to monitor, we're going to continue to do these things, right? But I'm only going by the numbers that you guys are giving us now. I can't go by numbers that we don't have. I can't go by what other adults are in the schools, because that's not what I'm giving. I'm only giving this number now. If there's other numbers that's in the school that will reflect these numbers or change these numbers, then if I get that number, then I can talk about that. But I'm only going by the numbers that we're giving, not by other stuff that I don't know about at this time.
Superintendent, it'd be really helpful for me to get a reminder overview of CSI, because I feel like we're talking about the CSI schools, but we're also talking about like Sabin, which has a high percentage of African American students, and so I think I tend to default to think, along racial lines when we talk about our highest need schools. So it'd be helpful to like understand the differentiation there and what's happening in our CSI schools, what's happening in our TSI schools. And help me remember what CSI stands for and TSI stands for. Targeted and critical, I know, but.
CSI is comprehensive support and improvement.
Okay.
TSI is targeted support and improvement.
So I was wrong on the critical.
It's okay. That's why we're all here.
So CSI school, is the school that's struggling more?
Yes, the CSI schools are our most struggling schools. It means that they have multiple, if not all of their student groups not meeting the mark and the standard of proficiency that we expect. A TSI school, a targeted school for improvement, may have a group of students that need some support, and that's why it's called targeted. Title I schools, as you know, are schools where a significant proportion of students qualify for free and reduced meals.
So for example, with Sabin is a TSI school.
Right.
So let's just, I don't know exactly, so let's just let's just use the example that Director Hollins used. If there is a large percentage of African American students at Sabin, which there is, how will we, and gets into the next phase of the conversation, how are we plugging additional services and supports to target that specific student group? So at Sabin, that target might be or will be our Black students there, right? They are also part of the Center for Black Student Excellence, part of the, so we have to think about.
Okay, so like maybe the white students at Sabin aren't meeting the standards that we hope that all students meet. And so at Sabin, we may not be focusing as much on class sizes because they're not a CSI school, but we're focusing on additional targeted interventions like reading specialists and other pieces to specifically work with if it's our Black students that aren't meeting with our Blacks. Okay, so that's kind of the difference with this CSI. It's universal across the school. TSI, there's interventions targeted to specific students. I've only been here 2.5 years.
Correct.
And every school that was named is either I know a couple of them are TSI, like the Green, TSI, Sabin, TSI, Tubman, I don't know, Title I, I'm still learning what that is, and George is a TSI, Wriggler also. So when I'm talking about things, I'm talking about the direct target, not just overall. I'm talking about, because I know these schools, I've been to these schools, I have family members in these schools. So when I'm looking at that, that's what I'm speaking to. Thank you.
Title I was like a socioeconomic.
It's a proxy for socioeconomic status, yes.
I think we're on this, we agree with your concern, Director Hollins. I mean, remember, we do have a state and federal accountability system. That's why these schools have that designation. So if you take a school like Sabin or any other targeted support intervention TSI school, their school improvement plan have to call out who is the subset of students there that we have to have a plan for better supporting. So, that's the work that our school leaders have to do with our principal supervisors. Come back and say, we're just talking staffing allocations here. We're not talking about the meat and potatoes of school and district improvement plans. And that's the sort of exciting part of this is, working with that school community, what other kinds of supports, time, space, professional learning, targeted student supports that are going to help elevate opportunity outcomes for students at schools that are designated for TSI. And we're accountable to the state of Oregon to show that we're moving the needle in those TSI schools. When designations get refreshed and relabeled in the state, just like they are in every state under ESSA, hopefully we have less schools because we've done the right work. We've learned a concept of what is the right mix of supports, and hopefully we'll be able to learn from those, sustain those, spread them to other places that have similar gaps.
Well, and I appreciate that, Superintendent. And I'm gonna just go on. I don't care about being accountable to the state of Oregon. The state of Oregon has never been accountable to our kids of color. So I'm more about being accountable to our kids. I could care less about the state.
I'm just reminding, there was a question about the designation.
I know. I'm just saying. I hear you.
Am I just doing the right thing?
I just want to make a quick comment, and that's that we say Black and Native, Black and Native, Black and Native, but we actually had 4 student groups that were not achieving at the levels that we'd expected, and we never call them out. And I'm looking at using, I would like us to use empowering language, but when we leave those other 2 racial groups out, it begs the question of why aren't we focusing our language on and our attention on those other 2 groups that also are not meeting benchmarks.
Say the name.
So Dr. Proctor will be calling those groups out.
Okay, I mean, consistently, like our language should be, we have a racial equity plan and a policy and everything else. Why not call and name? You can't measure it if you don't name it. It makes me think that we don't care, or we're using. I can't understand why we don't.
Look, as a Latino man, and as a chief of staff, as a Latino man, we are very conscious about the fact that our concerted effort using a targeted universalist approach is to focus our attention on Black and Native students, because historically, this system, particularly for the public schools, and particularly in Oregon, it has done a huge disservice to the founding of this district. The Black experience and the Native experience. And what we also know is that Black and Native students can thrive, then all votes will rise. Then my community will be.
John been trying to get a Black vote. Trying to get a Black vote.
I do respect that.
This is what's important, and I think this is what gets lost a lot of time. This district, right? We heard from the Secretary of State today, right? Telling us once again the same thing that we know, that this system has failed Black and brown kids. And they're telling me, they're telling Dr. Proctor, they're telling you, they're telling Herman, they're telling people of color who have experienced this American education system meant not to help us succeed, not to see us succeed, and yet we're here. And so this constant rhetoric going back and forth that we don't care about Black kids, that we don't care about brown kids, that we don't care about Pacific Islander kids, I'm done with it. It's exhausting.
You're telling me.
It's exhausting.
You're telling me.
Or I get it, Oregonian. You're woke.
It's
What
Oregon.
we need is action. And this board and this senior leadership is committed to that action.
Okay.
He's giving
yeah,
Okay. Somebody pass the offer tray around.
I'm not arguing with you. I was calling to question why we don't specifically call out. And when you say Black and Native, and I understand the history too, I understand the history of the state, this country, and I understand disempowering language too. So I'm just wondering why we're not just
Chair Pass, I think
putting it all out there.
I think what
And I know, John Powell's coming to town.
Yeah, so
we're all going to go see him.
I think what we're trying to do is because I think we're trying to use it as an empowering, through empowerment language, because Black and Native students don't get called out. And until we can all be comfortable about calling out Black and Native students, then we don't get the work done. And time and time again, whenever we try to center work on Black students, it's always like, but what about someone else? Whenever we try to surface the presence of Native American students, they're not here. So it is very, I think it's very intentional on our part about using this language, not in a way to silence or to not care about our other students. It is in direct opposition to the fact that Black and Native students have been invisibilized
Mm-hmm.
and silenced and oppressed in our system. So, when we talk about like that sort of like anti-racist stance, it is in the spirit of being anti-racist that we specifically call out Black and Native students. And it is intentional. It is about sort of putting that space in the room and putting that language in the room and having folks experience discomfort and just say, well, why not about other folks? Well, why not Black and Native students?
Yes. And I'm not uncomfortable with the term, trust me.
Black Lives Matter.
So Black Lives Matter. I was talking about test scores. That's it. We have 4 groups that have very poor test scores. And I've asked it before, why don't we talk about that? I get that we're naming Black and Native American because of the history.
So before we move on, one simple exercise, Superintendent or Dr. Proctor, that I think could be helpful for the board would be to just see a description of the various staff positions in, say, one of our CSI schools. See how that's staffed next to a school that is, higher SES, just because maybe everybody doesn't have the opportunity to walk through those schools and to understand what those positions are. And then when we see it in the budget in aggregate, that's different from actually having a picture of who's in the building.
I think having a TSI school in there as well to see the difference between that universal sort of comprehensive intervention and the targeted intervention and the different strategies, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I
Because
appreciate the suggestion. I think to illustrate what we would hope is a day in life at a CSI school, right? It's beyond the people, which is valued and necessary. The activity you see there, the support you can see, the resources that we have to we should be able to distinguish what's different.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Superintendent. Were you done? Sorry.
Go ahead, Director.
I couldn't, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear whether you were done. One of the things is, I think, most of us have been in schools and see the difference. But I think we're just asking about the numbers that are actually being presented to us. And while there may be other staff in those schools, I guess the topic we're talking about is class sizes, which is what's happening as the classroom is like the most important determinant of student outcomes. And, I guess I think it's great. And I think it's important that we have, and necessary that we have additional staff in TSI and CSI schools. But I think it misses the point in some ways to say, well, they have larger class sizes, but they have all these other things, because this isn't about equal. It's about trying to get equitable outcomes. And I feel like in some ways, and maybe we do need a more comprehensive sheet, because just looking at the numbers, when I'm looking specifically at George and Ockley Green, they may have a lot of other staff someplace else, but I'm just looking at what it's going to be like in the classroom and imagining and just knowing about the challenges I've heard this year, like how that plays out. And it's not going to necessarily help to have, somebody who's outside the classroom when you're trying to drive changes in instruction in the classroom. So I think it would be useful, but I don't think it's also proves any particular point.
We're going to start to get a better sense of what some of those ingredients are. We recognize school district improvement is a coherent set of strategies working in unison towards a shared goal. And so that's what we have to have. We have to have a multifaceted plan. And here at a high level, what some developing components are, that we're going to come back in our proposal to really describe. And as we work with our school leaders, it's going to be really important around, what that experience looks like for the given student or educator. And it's true. Some of those supports will be experienced within the classroom, and maybe some as a support outside the classroom. Hopefully, we're taking on this work in as inclusive a nature as possible. But I think we should proceed if we're done on the class size. Do you have some more, Dr. Rouse?
Just a little bit, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Superintendent. Wanted to share a few thoughts on class size, actually. And as you mentioned, it is one lever, it is not the lever. We recognize that having smaller class sizes has a strong appeal to both parents and teachers. As a parent of 2 children, I believe that having fewer students in class meant that my child would get more attention from the teacher. As a former teacher, I remember thinking that if I had fewer students, I could build stronger relationships with my students. However, there's strong evidence to suggest that reducing class sizes alone will not increase students' academic performance. The research on class size is mixed at best. For every study touting class size's impact on student achievement, you can find another study where class size does not have an impact on student achievement. While we have class size goals and maximums, they work best in conjunction with educator effectiveness, high yield instructional practices, and high quality instructional materials. We know and understand that building the capacity in our educators while providing necessary professional learning and high quality curricular materials will have an impact on student achievement. This is not to say that class size is not important. It obviously is for our community, and it is also a value reflected on our average class sizes we shared with you tonight. However, as both our superintendent and many of you have spoken about tonight, we have a unique opportunity to improve outcomes for students, especially for our Black, Native American, and students of color. As you heard from Superintendent Guerrero, the mandate from this board and this community is to disrupt the systemic patterns that have long plagued this school district. It has long been unacceptable that in our classrooms, and as shown by our fall map data, Black and Native American students are reading and performing mathematics far below grade level expectations, or that they are graduating at a lower rate than their white peers. These are the historical and pervasive outcomes we are determined to disrupt and improve. So next, you'll hear from our Deputy Superintendent for Instruction in School Communities, Dr. Cheryl Proctor, who will share with you a glimpse of how we expect to use the additional one-time federal dollars to make significant progress on this pervasive issue aligned with the board's goals.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Adams. Good evening again, everyone. We're just here having this great discussion, and I'm excited to share just a little portion and additional information to contribute to this discussion. When I came to Portland earlier this year, I was excited for the sense of direction that this school board and our superintendent talked about, which of course, as Dr. Adams mentioned, is disrupting the patterns at PPS so that our Black, Native, and students of color can truly thrive. This commitment is not just an attempt to signal virtuous beliefs. I don't believe that. I think this really is about ensuring and that there is a strong messaging that our Black, Native, and students of color truly matter and that their achievement truly matters. It is reflected, in our conversations. It is also reflected here at the board levels as we're engaging tonight. It drives our budget allocations and informs our management decisions. For us, this work, and for me, this work is personal. I have dedicated my life to working in urban school systems around the country, in part because I remember what it was like being a student of color, a Black girl in an education system that was not designed for me to succeed. A Black girl that is an immigrant that came to this country. And in schools, I was in a system where I was made to feel invisible and which I was not adequately prepared to meet academic success beyond high school. And yet I am here. We are here. It is both my personal connection to this work and the sense of urgency to improve the learning experiences of students, especially on our behalf of our Black, Native, and children of color. Since the pandemic, the need is more real now than ever before. Here at PPS, according to the fall map data, as you indicated, shared the past, only 25% of Black students read at grade level. Only 29% of our Native students read at grade level. Only 40% of our Latino students read at grade level. And this is the reality of the students of color here at PPS compared to their white and Asian counterparts. So Black students and students of color the trend is that they are regulated to a lower standard of education. They are regulated to lower expectations. And this causes students to to disengage in our classrooms, as evidenced in part by the number of independent and state-issued reviews and audits on PPS. As mentioned before, a state audit that was done just recently. So as we go to the next slide, we plan to share a few detailed and balanced and budget. We plan to share a detailed and balanced budget on April 26th, and the superintendent will bring this information before the board for approval. However, we recognize that in the absence of information, narratives are created and do not tell the whole story. So tonight I would like to share with you a very high-level overview of how we intend to use one-time federal dollars to make significant progress towards increasing Black, Native, and student of color achievement in our schools. We believe that in order to raise student achievement, especially for our students of color, we must and are planning to invest these one-time ESSER dollars and other strategic targeted investments in very tangible ways that directly support students and that gives our educators and staff professional development and collaboration time. Tonight, we will share a preview for you of how we will continue to invest our SIA dollars from the state and a preview of how we plan to spend down one-time dollars in service of our students in our schools. We expect a continued and steady increase of mental and behavioral health supports, for example, for our students. This includes keeping social workers on staff and reinvesting in counseling positions to support the increasing mental and behavioral health needs of our students, needs that have only increased through the pandemic. As you heard last week, PPS announced a partnership with the University of Oregon to establish and build a sustainable pipeline of child behavioral health specialists. We expect to target the early stages of this relationship with the University of Oregon on middle schools and invest specifically in how we are bridging this partnership to benefit our students within our middle schools. That means, for example, in due time, we will begin to see more adults across our schools providing more behavioral interventions and mental health supports. And I look forward to sharing more details with you and the community in the future. Through the life of the ESSER grant, we plan to utilize dollars to target learning supports across every PPS school, but focused on supporting our CSI and Title I schools. In April, you will hear specific details about how we plan to use these dollars to target academic achievement, especially for our Black, Native, and Latino students. For example, here's what we will talk about. You will learn about our plan to add literacy and math acceleration educators to targeted schools who will zero in on a caseload of students needing significant acceleration supports. This also looks like more middle school transitioning to a 7-period day. And with that transition to the 7-period day, there is the added benefit of the reduced class size. This is particularly important because as we focus on the core instruction of reading and math, our students must still have access to those electives and elective opportunities that spark their curiosity and interest as well. This includes visual and performing arts, which I'm proud to say that we continue to support. Next year, an overwhelming majority of students will attend a PPS school that has both a performing and visual arts program. And this was not the case 4 years ago. We also expect to grow our extended learning and enrichment programming with a specific focus on strengthening the collaboration with our community, culturally specific organizations and partners. Before the pandemic, but especially through it, our culturally specific ResJ partners have continued to step up, serving as key partners to provide direct supports to students. And we are thankful for their commitment and look forward to continuing to invest in these culturally specific ResJ partnerships and after-school programming. Last summer, PPS hosted its largest summer school programming in its history, and this upcoming summer, we're proposing doing more. Offering a robust menu of summer programming that provides extended learning and enrichment opportunities for students, especially our students that are within CSI and Title I schools. So we're also expecting to provide additional resources to the constellation of schools that make up the Center for Black Student Excellence, aiming to target the pervasive opportunity gap that has been here for generations. And we also plan to accelerate a Native American student success effort aimed at a shared vision for our Indigenous student success, grounded in proven and actionable strategies. As educators, we know the critical importance of professional development and collaboration time, and the benefits that it has, again, on student success. That is why you will hear a plan for using one-time dollars to build a professional knowledge and skills of our educators and staff. In fact, thanks to these one-time dollars, we expect that every PPS educator will receive access to more paid and/or released professional learning and collaboration opportunities over the next few years. As we move towards a more data-informed system, we will invest in additional resources, including coaching support for educators and earmark dollars to support specific school improvement activities within our schools. We also plan on making significant progress on our strategic plan priorities, including a focus on cultivating a strong culture of racial equity in care, developing a diverse, high-quality, and thriving workforce, and progress towards establishing data-driven continuous improvement practices. We must create and support a culture open to positive change. We must build a culture of care and respect, and one that builds trust and promotes empathy for one another. And lastly, central to the success of our children are our families. And next year we expect, in alignment to our belief of how central our families are, PPS will launch a PPS Family University, an initiative aimed at elevating the skills, knowledge, and support of families, especially of families of color, to better advocate for their students' success. Directors, PPS has a substantial work to do to improve the results for our Black, Native, and students of color. And our budget is really targeting towards our belief and our alignment towards those needs of our students. So our budget proposal next month will highlight again more specific details about how we will expect to undo the unacceptable realities faced by our students of color. I am motivated by our community's commitment to creating a more positive counter-narrative precisely because the historical record at PPS has not been good for our students of color. Given the charge by the board, our community, and our superintendent, we expect that these one-time dollars will be earmarked and spent on supporting educators and direct support for students, especially, again, our students of color. If we go to the next slide, and you'll see in the next two slides, they are very preliminary, and they represent today's estimated budget. This slide here is our projected budget allocation for the student investment account. 15% of revenue from the SIA is used to reduce class sizes. Close to 30% of the revenue from SIA funds social workers and other mental health supports. We value all in our community who both advocate for these much needed resources and appreciate the community for the vision to use these dollars on important areas, including mental health and reduction of schools' class sizes. Overall, the SIA funds close to 190 school-based staff, all student-facing positions. That means that of the 39 million, 22 million, more than 55% of SIA funds ongoing positions. Next slide. On this slide.
Before you go to that slide, can I just ask a question, just so I understand this? So 22 of the 39 sustains school-based staff. So I see 6 million of it here in class size. Where is the other 16 million? Is that targeted learning supports, or is it what?
Good question. Thank you for that question. They FTE positions are represented in each of these categories. It's one way or another.
So for example, under mental and behavioral health, this is where the social workers that we
And
have in our
counselors come into
system
play. Yeah.
are funded.
So it's across the categories in addition to the 6 million, which is purely FTE.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So as we look at this current slide that is up, again, you'll see how we plan on spending down our one-time ESSER dollars. While this is still very early and in draft form, we expect that these funds will strategically invest in areas that I outlined a bit earlier. I want to be, really transparent and clear that this is preliminary. We continue to review data, remain in dialogue with school staff and communities to refine these sets of strategies aimed at increasing student achievement, especially again for our Black, Native, and students of color. And if we go to the next slide, as I close and open us up for discussion, I would like to highlight 3 main points that you heard tonight. The first being that the general fund is not keeping pace with the cost to operate schools. Moreover, CFO Delgado warned that we shouldn't spend one-time money on ongoing or recurring costs. 2, even as our school-based staffing positions were reduced by 4% or 107 out of close to 3,000 FTE positions, PPS is projected to have average class sizes across first, second, and third grade classrooms of 22. In fourth grade, 23. In fifth grade, 24. And in middle schools, 28. These averages are even lower across our CSI schools, where on average we expect to see class sizes fewer than 18 across kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. And third, we expect to use one-time dollars to make significant progress towards increasing Black, Native, and students of color, their achievement across all of our schools. Tonight, you heard a preview of how we intend to utilize these dollars to advance student achievement and make significant progress towards meeting our goals outlined by the board. We look forward again to working on this ambitious agenda to make PPS a great system for all students, but especially our Black and Native kids. Now, we'll just open it up for discussion. Thank you for listening.
So I very much appreciated all the information on this. One thing I didn't hear throughout the entire presentation was anything about our special education students or our special education classrooms. And I know that there are some changes to IDEA funding coming, it looks like. And I'm not sure how that's going to impact our special education grants and funding for next year. I mean, I think it just all got released today. So I think that IDEA is gonna have an impact on our special education funding, and don't know if you all are prepared to talk about that at this time, or if that's something we can dive into at our next.
We would dive into it in our next meeting, because there's also some additional child nutrition information as well
Okay.
that you need to just kind of better understand as well. So if any of you read the Washington Post article just on Monday, but there's a potential for some additional considerations as we think about how to balance budgets.
But I would love to have some sort of an overview of how we're staffing for special education, what that looks like. And I know that that's, as we go back to Director Green's passion for our charter schools, I know that that's been a conversation we've had with our CEOs. Our alternative schools also is how we allocate and manage special education funds. So I'd love to see a little bit more of a dive into some of that.
I mean, we definitely like to shed some light on special education funding as its own category. We're hopeful the council's advocacy produces an increase in IDEA monies. Jay's here, our special ed director, so he's hearing this, and certainly we can be prepared to articulate what's the next sort of prospect of year look like.
And to be fair to staff, we were invited to send questions in earlier, and I sent in like 12. Special education was not one of the ones I sent in earlier, so I apologize for adding it at the end of the meeting now.
And I'm, as well as about the alternative schools. So I'd love to find some time where we can talk about that, because I see all of our schools here, but I want to hear more about what our plans are for alternative schools and our charter schools, and see how we're going to work with our partners who are educating our other students. I say our because those kids live in my community, and they go to our schools that we're partnering with. But I'd really like to see some information on how we plan to support and undergird those schools, so that in a season of what I believe we're getting ready to come into, they don't experience any more lack or hurt than what they're already experiencing. So I'd like to see that, but I also just want to say thank you for what we have. And I appreciate that we're all acknowledging that this is a work in progress. I think that last slide with the red writing on it was literally to tell me to be quiet.
I changed it to orange just for you. Don't look at what they said. You
But I did check your map, and it did total up to 70, the things that were there that say subject to change, so thank you.
So thank you for that. And I'm interested in seeing, as we continue to go on, that's the one thing that I like about this. And I just want to express that it is my desire to be completely transparent throughout this entire process, that our budget is so huge. It's so massive. I intend to talk about it. So I think we should just plan for long nights, because line items. So to the extent where I'm going to be like, page 3, line 7. Why are we buying that hammer? Page 5, line 6. That I'm going to be that ridiculous. I'm just letting y'all know that ahead of time. I am going to be an annoyance. It is not because I don't like you. It is not because I don't care. But I feel like we in this season, when people are hurting, we need to be able to clearly articulate our why. And I believe in us pushing the limit as far as we can, because the same way we get these new unexpected dollars that come in, oh, I don't know how these came in. I believe that if we push the envelope as far as we possibly can and get it where it needs to be, then new money and new opportunities will present itself. It'll come up, because we're doing what's right by the kids and the students that we're supposed to serve. And I don't believe that we should be like, I got to make sure that we got this $23 million cushion, or whatever our cushion amount is, because I feel like we can make it up the following year. We can figure out a way to get it back. I'm gonna push us to the limit every single time, and you need to be able to justify why we can't spend that dollar, because we can spend it. If the money is there, we should spend it.
Your detailed orientation, Dr. Green. Work with board leadership.
And they're gonna hate me, I know
to
it.
make sure that, at the right level, we're focusing our attention. We've had prior retreats in the past around, at what level.
It'll probably be some wrong levels too, because I'm going to ask questions. I believe we should all be asking questions. So I'm gonna ask at the right level. I'm gonna ask at the wrong level. I'm just telling y'all up front right now, because I believe in transparency and communication being king. I am going to ask the questions about the money. I don't want to save no money. I don't want to save no money. That's not what I'm looking to do. I'm not trying to save the money so we can have $30 million sitting in the bank and then somebody lose a job, or like Emerson School who might not have a home in June. You see what I'm saying? And so I don't want to be in that space where I was like, oh, dang. But at least we got this cushion over here, so we're okay. It's raining. So that's why I was asking, is this fund money or fund money? Like rainy day fund? Because right now we're in a tsunami. So let's spend this money because it's raining and let's go with it. And next year, new money will come up like it always does. And I'm gonna stop talking.
So I want to jump in on that. If
I
I
was
get
on
my
CRC when.
every time, Ellie.
So I was on CRC when we said we wanted the 10% fund. We wanted the 10%, and it was because of the crash that happened in 2008. And that we had devastating layoffs. And so I think you said, like, well, what happens if, 500,000 students show up? What do we do? That fund is there for that. And you say it's a tsunami now, but I look at the cliff we might be going off, and I do think we need to spend down some of our reserves, but I don't want to spend all of them because I think worse is coming.
Yeah, so.
And I'm happy to have a longer conversation with
No,
you about
Aileen
why
knew
CRC.
exactly what I was going to say, and so she had to say it first. But I'm going to put some of that same emphasis on because I actually think it's really important. It's politically, I'm with you. It is so easy for me to vote to spend that money and make everybody happy, and it's all fine. And the problem is that as a board, we need to ask the question, but what happens next year? What happens the year after that? I love your optimism. Money's going to fall from the sky, the school district's going to win the lottery, it's going to be there. But that's not always the case. And I lived through the 2008 recession as the budget director of the city of Portland. I will tell you, we had departments, the Bureau of Development Services, everybody remembers, we had a commissioner in charge who said, 2008 is not that bad. It's going to turn back around. It's going to be fine. Not going to lay anybody off, right? Didn't lay anybody off. Next year, same thing. Spent down all the reserves, huge reserves. You know what they did in that third year? 200 employees lost their job in like one fell swoop. That was traumatic, not just for those employees, because we're not talking about reductions through attrition, through retirements, through other easy ways. We're talking about like straight up layoffs, caused bumping throughout the entire city. I mean, it was a catastrophe, and it was by one commissioner who said, I'm optimistic and things are going to get better. Well, in 2008, they did not get better. And so I am with you. Our job is to budget conservatively, but plan for the upside and be able to respond to it. And what I've heard staff say is, if the state comes through with more money, if the feds come through with more money, if our students return, we've got ways to add this back and add this back pretty quickly. And I think that's really important to make sure we can do. But I got to tell you, and one of the questions I have is, what would it look like if we preserved all the positions, right? Because this is, and I didn't ask this beforehand, so if you don't have the answer, I'm fine waiting for it. But one of the things we're getting a lot of emails about is preserve all the positions, lower those class sizes. And I will tell you, that sounds great, right? My understanding is that if we were to, and we could do that, and I actually want to outline what I sort of see as sort of the sideboards of our options. But I have a feeling that's going to result in again, a huge cliff in 1 to 2 years, meaning that right now, what looks like, this is going to be really traumatic for our system, it would be 2, 3, 4 times that, and it would happen all at once. And that would be a catastrophe for us as a district. On the other hand, we also don't want to just plug all that money and have a 10 to 15% reserve and be sitting on tens of millions of dollars.
Exactly.
Our class. So for me,
because how much new money did we get this year that we weren't expecting? If we look at that, right? If we just look at all the new money that presented itself that we weren't expecting, and we lost some, because I know at one point we had, they were saying we're gonna get 12 million or something like that. Then you got 4. So
but expenses are going up.
right. So I want to go back to that bottom line. So if we could just from the very beginning, because I just want to make sure we don't lose that point. We have a $51 million hole, and all the people who have been saying you're getting more money, they're not wrong. But they just left out the other half of the equation, which is that our costs are also going up. And I made this analogy before, and it's really, I hate to overuse it, but if your income goes up by $100 a month, you got a pay raise. But if your rent went up by $200 a month, you have to cut expenses. You've still got a pay raise, and you have to cut expenses. And that's what we're facing as a district moving forward. It seems to be like the sideboards of our options. We can, and I'm going to lay these out, and Chief Delgadillo, forgive me because I'm not advocating for any of these, and I'm with you on the one-time resources. But one of the options is preserve all those positions, spend our one-time, spend our reserves down, preserve all those positions, keep those class sizes lower. What that would mean is, one, a fiscal cliff a year or two from now, and I think it'd be great if we could get more information on what that looks like, and also defunding the superintendent's interventions, which again, we directed him to do, because it's really directing that ESSER money back towards teachers in the classroom.
Yeah.
So there's a trade-off there, right, in terms of that option. The other option, as we were talking, is to fully fund reserves, don't use any of the money, sit on a whole bunch of stuff. Am I right? That would be cuts of like 181, right? When looking through, based on enrollment declines, we had like 180 positions, but then we've gotten that down to 107 by sort of investing some of these dollars. And then there's in the middle, which is what I think it sounds like the superintendent's going to provide us by the end of April, which is, yes, still using some of those one-time monies, but still making some of those reductions. And personally, I will just say, I am comfortable somewhere in that middle. Whether we tweak it for a few more classroom teachers or a few more targeted interventions, I think is a worthy discussion for us to have. And I think it's a good discussion for us to have with our community, with our teachers, with our principals. But I'm very uncomfortable at those extremes because I think the risks there are pretty significant to us.
Generally, you saw staff numbers so far that are calculated with our general fund, like what can we sustain? So we don't create a situation like that. And for those of us that have been building district budgets, yes, in 2008 during the recession, there's a huge infusion of federal one-time monies. Lessons learned, districts that spent all of those on positions, 200-300, peak slips went up 2 years later. Districts that had a more measured, balanced approach, invested it in their people, invested it in professional development, much better off. And so I think there's some lessons, to pay attention to for when you find yourself in the circumstance. But what's a level that we're comfortable at? Because it was also the board who said this is the level of reserve we want to keep. But we also, want to keep some stability in our school communities, absolutely. We want to engage in activities that we can perpetuate, for beyond the next couple of years. So these are all the trade-offs, and the mandate was bring us a plan and a proposal of action steps we can take to improve and positively impact on Black student opportunity and achievement. So if we're choosing other levers, we share accountability on reaching those goals. So it's a good discussion for us to have.
And we said we'd support you 100% in your efforts to do that.
I didn't want to quote.
Okay.
You're right, Jackson. That's what I heard.
One of the things that's really interesting is how our lived experience contributes to our thoughts about money. And if we had enough when we were growing up, or we didn't have enough, or, the sky's the limit, or whatever, if you're living day to day. So I think that we have a board composition that's going to hopefully have a balanced approach to how we approach this year. I also had questions about what would it look like to keep all of the teachers intact, and how do we taper, how do we do that and prepare for this cliff? I also had 4 questions from most of the members of our local BIPOC state legislative caucus, and they posed 4 questions I'm happy to read, but I think I can answer a couple of them. One of them I can answer is the exact budget hole for next year and how was the budget calculated. You might need help with the calculation. How are you making assumptions about costs and anticipated revenue for 23-24? So it's a question about wanting the modeling, or what was the model, what were the assumptions that went into the model? Were community members who withdrew students during COVID pandemic surveyed to inform the assumptions that none of those students will come back, for instance, into the district next year? I can answer how the ESSER funds were being spent based on the slide in the presentation. And then what, if any, concurrent cuts are happening to admin positions? So I'd also like to make a plea. I love the spreadsheets a lot. I love numbers, but I really want to challenge us to present the data in a more visual way. I mean, for some of us that want a piece of a pie rather than a spreadsheet. I know Director Scott loves the spreadsheets, but if we could do a data visualization that was aimed at someone that was a layperson, I think that could provide a level of transparency that our community would be grateful for, not just me.
Chair, in the past, we certainly had conversation about that with, I thought Freddie was behind. With, okay.
Oh, there he is.
Have had conversation about that. Part of the challenge is we're trying to do, everyone wants us to distill a very complex process down to a very simple 2-3 talking points or a simple graphic, and we will continue to try to work on that. It's just not been something that we've met with success yet. And we've been thinking about it for like a week or two, but we've been talking about that internally as well.
I think for my day job, a lot of how to present data in pictures, and because it can cross language barriers, and it can be very challenging sometimes. But pictures worth 1,000 words, and rows and columns of numbers. I want one more point, and that's about layoffs, and that's that when we do, when and if we do lay off people, it's based on seniority. Our staff of color are going to be hit hardest in those situations.
I'd like to speak to that because it's often not understood that the way, first of all, I do think it's unlikely that we are going to have layoffs, except in special situations or particular licensures or things along those lines. But that being said, we have a contract with our teachers union that steps through the unassignment process by first asking for people to volunteer if they want to. Second, goes based on seniority. And then there are exceptions to that. One is a racial diversity exception. The other is a gender diversity exception. So if you don't have a certain level of diversity in your schools, you have teachers that would otherwise be unassigned, that would help keep that diversity in the right direction. Then our contract with our teachers allows us to do that. That's also true with language abilities as well. If there's a language ability that is serving our students. So I would just want to, that's this year, those diversity exceptions were used more than any other year. So I want to make sure that not only do we have those in the contract, we are leveraging them.
I appreciate that. I did not know that. I know at the City of Portland, we've known that when we've hired people of color last, then when layoffs happens, they're let go first. So I appreciate your balancing, doing your best to balance
On the question of
impact.
staffing levels, I just want to remind us that this year, given the pandemic, the mobility of students who weren't sure what to expect, we've held harmless our staffing levels. And I think a $22 million additional investment. So I know we don't get credit for that, it's always recognized, but we did do that this year.
Credit is overrated.
Pardon me?
Credit is overrated.
I'm not bringing it up for that reason, but because, it was important. It was important
Yeah.
for school communities with that. And so, what level can we sort of make a calculation and estimation as something we can do?
Yeah.
I want to, Director Brim Edwards looks like has a question. And then Director Hollins, did you have a question too?
Yeah, trying to follow the protocol here, raising my hand. And I did submit some other questions in advance that I'd still like to have answers about. So just for the record, would like the answers to that. Also, in the conversation about staffing, not only, and I appreciate Director Lowry bringing up the question about special education staffing, but also I'm interested in what sort of supports and classroom supports there are for ELL students. And in addition, for those schools, because I think when we look at these big charts, sometimes we forget that they don't capture everything. And I know some schools have more than one SES classroom that requires just a lot more administrative support and just general school support, and that doesn't seem to be reflected that I can see in this. But I guess my overarching thought about the staffing and the concern about having staffing cuts is, I've been around the district when it made I think the deepest cuts in the last 50 years, and they were painful. But I also, when those cuts were made, had a second grader and a third grader, And I'm thinking, like, my second grader is not going to have another second grade, or my third grader who doesn't yet know how to read is not going to have another third grade if it's really diminished. So, I think about the conversations about, how much money to put in reserves. And the reality is our reserve policy says 5 to 10%. And if I were thinking of a case, I thought I'd seen it all being on the PPS board, but I'd never been on the board during a pandemic where you had students who missed, hours, weeks, months of instruction. The thing that we all know is the most important thing to have. So I guess I kind of view the last 2 years as sort of exceptional years. And I really respect Director Scott's, experience. And I think I've been there in those situations too. And so I don't suggest using reserves lightly. But I also know that we've, over the last 10 years, from a whole variety of sources, have a lot more resources coming into our schools. And, I think we're in an exceptional set of circumstances. And if we don't help over the next year and a half, kids make up what they maybe lost during the pandemic, and close gaps and fill gaps that, it's not like when they get to, 7th or 8th grade or, in high school that we're going to be able to fill those. So I view this year as like a real sense of urgency, and maybe we do, dig deep and try and fill as much as we can the gaps now, and taper it off versus, in some ways it seems like, well, we're going to go off the cliff now and hold those reserves for later. And I just am not there, in the sense of I'm looking at these class sizes and I'm thinking about the gaps that the principals and teachers have told me that exists in middle schools, and just the social emotional needs of kids. And I wonder how that's going to happen if we have class sizes of those amounts, because they actually, most of them aren't 28. So that's I would be in favor of looking at how we can, like I say, flood our schools with the supports our students need right now, to hopefully get back to a much more normal just cadence of our schools and our students getting back to grade level.
Thank you, Director Brimowitz, for your comments. Director Hollins?
Thank you. Just got one question and then a comment. I would like to know how we're engaging our principals in this budget process. I think they are a real critical partner in this when we're talking about things that happen at the school level. So I would like to just kind of know how we are engaging with our principals on that. I don't need to answer that tonight. The other thing I want to kind of talk about is, Norberto, I hope I got that right, always talk about this as a pie versus a whale. And I want to push back a little bit on that, kind of in line with Director Green is saying that, when things that's important to folks, they find the money for it, regardless. When they wanted to do some expansion at the airport, they found $2 billion to do it. When we wanted to do new schools, we put it out there, $1.2 billion for schools. When we wanted to build a convention center, hey, they found the money to do it. When we wanted to do light rail, they found the money to do it. When we wanted to do the Tulicum Bridge crossing, they found the money to do it. We just put a pedestrian bridge over 84. So when people really have a priority, they find the way together. And so, and this goes out to everyone who's listening or who's on here, is that when our kids become a priority, we will find the money to do it, period. Whether that's from the state, whether that's from the feds, whether that's from the city, metro, anybody, when people want to get projects done, they find the money to do it. And that's the reality. That's the city I live in. I see it constantly from the time that I was 5 years old here, that I can pay attention, and municipalities and folks want to get something done, they get it done. And so to go to Director Green, yes, we need to find the money. We need to talk to all these people who are talking about equity, diversity, and all that stuff, and go find the money. This is from the state. They talk about widening I-5. They went from $700 million to $1 billion. They're going to find the money. So to say we can't think bigger, I think we can if everyone is putting a priority on our kids, because they find the money for everything else. And this is what it pains me, because we always talk about we got to be in constraint when we come to educating and paying for the education of our kids. We got to be in this box. We only do this, we only do that. But when other things when other priorities come up, they find the money to do it. And so what I'm putting out to everyone, we need to find money to do it. That's all I got to say.
Director Hollins, I'll take you up on that challenge. I think that's great. And by all means, if there are options, let's put them on the table and go out and find it. I guess I want to make sure we're operating in the same political environment, though. Right now, we have legislators who are questioning our decisions. The same legislators or former legislators who are running for governor who failed to fund a quality education model, who failed to fund the school district even at our current service level. So I hear you, and if that state is going to come through with more resources, by all means, let's get down there. But right now, it's going the opposite direction, which is that these legislators that failed to give us the money are now criticizing us for having to, potentially make these reductions. So I'm with you.
I
do it.
I agree 100% on that, because I heard, and I think it was Tina Kotek who criticized the stuff, and I'm thinking, well, I hope if she's running for governor, I hope she's going to advocate to fund our education the way it needs to be funded. Because you put it out there, great, I get it. I hear the criticism, but what are you going to do about it as well? How are you going to participate in it as well? Because it's one thing to criticize and talk about something. There's a whole different thing about actually doing something about it.
I'm sorry, I have to just jump in and to defend our legislative delegation, because 3 years ago,
Julia, you can't defend.
Let me just say that they did.
You can't defend the system. You can't defend a system that historically has used racist policies and practices over decades to say, okay, well, now they're doing something because they're doing something in a few short years or a few years that they've been doing something. I understand what you're saying, but they can't get that kind of buy.
I haven't said it yet. So maybe let me say it, and then you can criticize it. Because and I will acknowledge they're not to the quality education model yet, but there was the largest investment in our schools, $1.5 billion additional that was put into the system 2 to 3 years ago with the Student Success Act. And it is real money into our system. And fortunately, our local voters have also put money into the system. I mean, I think that we have to acknowledge that the funds have gone up, and maybe our expenses are going up, sounds like too, but it's not that people have given us less money, and
we need more. Okay, I mean, you can't justify $1 billion or even $2 billion they would have gave us for the years and decades of disinvestment in our education system, which drastically reduce our way of creating generational wealth. If you're going to compare the $1 billion that they gave us, that's great. But what about what we have lost due to the racist policies and practices that have been going on for decades? How much is that? And then we can really start comparing on what they're doing now compared to what we lost moving up to that point. So to say that they're giving us something now, that's great, but we need more. There's a lot more that need to be getting to be able to put us on a path to where we're trying to go.
I think Director Hollins just said that was a down payment.
Well, and it's like what
I'll take a down payment.
We get the billion, but our costs are still going up, and our kids have so much need after the pandemic. We don't have the resources to provide the education that our students need, and that is the fundamental fact.
And during a
And yes,
budget
the SAA
surplus,
helped, but we still need more. So I wrote
and during
that.
a budget surplus year, we didn't increase funding for schools.
Yeah, during a
And
budget
we failed
surplus
to
year.
fund racial equity initiatives at the state level.
And racial equity initiatives did not get funded.
From the amount
And we look forward to
Every time.
Portrait, we got a portrait, a living portrait right here.
So Chair DePass, unless there are other questions or comments from colleagues, from your colleagues, I'd like to turn it over to Superintendent Guerrero to just close this out.
Oh, absolutely. And then also, is there provide a path forward? And hopefully, we've got other more. I hope we have a more robust budget season and another opportunity to bring questions. But in the meantime, is there what's the correct path for?
Absolutely.
The same path that we've had before.
Yeah, so if you continue to send us questions, staff will work on responding to those. I will make sure that our CFO sends the calendar of the budget process to everybody on the board, so you can remind yourself, refresh yourself on the different series of meetings that we're going to have over the course of the next 2 or 3 months around the budget, which actually begins next Tuesday. So, so many conversations forthcoming, public conversations, where our community will be able to hear and see the conversation in real time.
Appreciate the conversation tonight, directors. It was a good idea that we had this evening. We not meant a 6th straight week with the full board. It helps to clarify and agree on a cohesive direction, hopefully, as we continue over the coming weeks to land on a balanced budget. You know, we have a shared goal, and you know, we have to remain vigilant around resourcing strategies that are going to get us the result while we build a strong school system. So it's making those kinds of calculated trade-offs that you understand. And we have a real opportunity to create a demonstration of what's possible. So I appreciate Director Collins' optimism around it's important, at least for the billion that we control, you know, where we decide to put those dollars indicates a priority. So we're on the same page there. So appreciate the discussion. We have more. This helps shape and mold the proposal ultimately as we see.
Excellent. And thank you. I really also appreciate the discussion tonight. It's really great hearing the range of questions that are coming out and getting to know you as colleagues a little bit in a deeper way around money issues. So thank you. Thank you, Director Hollins and Director Brum Edwards. I think we're adjourned.
Right.